There was a period of about 4 years during which I said yes to nearly everything that was asked of me. Committee memberships, volunteer coordination, covering for colleagues, taking on additional projects that fell between the formal responsibilities of anyone on the team. Friends who needed help moving, helping acquaintances with their resumes, attending events I had no particular reason to attend because someone had mentioned it would mean something if I came. I was available in a way that became, over time, a kind of reputation. People knew they could ask me. People often did. And I said yes, consistently, with a warmth that was real enough that I had no reason to examine whether it was the whole of what was happening. The narrative I held about the yes saying was generous. I was someone who showed up. I had been raised to believe that people who show up for others are the ones who build things worth having, relationships, communities, the particular texture of a life that is not conducted in isolation. Saying yes was the practice of that value. I was not doing it to be liked, I told myself. I was doing it because it was the right way to be. The first crack in this narrative came from my sister, whose name is Isabel, and who has known me long enough to say things others don't. We were on the phone, and I was telling her about a commitment I had taken on, a significant one, a chairmanship of a working group that would require 18 months of substantive effort, and she interrupted me mid-explanation. She said, "Do you actually want to do this?" I said yes, of course, it was important work, there was no one else well-positioned to take it on. She said, "That's not what I asked. I asked if you wanted to do it." I did not have an answer that was honest. Which is to say, the honest answer was no, but I had not been operating with that as a relevant category. Whether I wanted something had stopped being the first question some years before. The first question had become, who needs this, can I provide it, what happens if I don't? What Isabel named in the conversation that followed was a pattern she had been watching for years. She said, "You've turned showing up into a full-time job, and I don't think it's actually about generosity anymore. I think it's about something else, and I'm not sure you know what it is." I pushed back. I articulated the value of contribution, of being present for others, of not being the kind of person who opts out when things require effort. She listened and then said, carefully, "I believe you about the values. What I'm asking about is the function. Why specifically does every ask get a yes? What happens inside you in the moment when someone asks for something and you say yes before you've thought about it?" That question required a different kind of looking than I had been doing. And when I looked at it honestly, at the interior sequence, the actual phenomenology of the yes saying, what I found was not what I expected. The yes did not come from a place of overflow, of having enough and wanting to give some. It came from a place of relief. The moment someone asked me for something and I said yes, a particular kind of tension resolved. Not the tension of wondering how I would fit the commitment in, not the logistical anxiety of an overfull calendar. A different tension. Social. Relational. The tension of wondering, in some background register that I had not examined, whether I was valued, whether my presence was welcome, whether the relationship would hold if I were not consistently useful within it. The yes was not generosity. The yes was management. I was managing a fear, the fear of being unwanted, of the relationship contingent on my utility, by continuously demonstrating my utility. The shows of generosity were real in the sense that I genuinely did things, genuinely helped, genuinely showed up. But the motivation underneath was not abundance. It was anxiety. And anxiety-driven generosity has a specific quality that is different from the other kind, a quality of compulsion rather than choice, of obligation rather than gift. The 4 years of yes-saying had produced a life in which I was very busy and almost never doing what I had specifically chosen to do. Almost everything on my calendar was there because someone had asked, because I had been needed, because there was a gap and I was available to fill it. My own preferences, what I actually wanted to be doing with my time, what work genuinely interested me, what relationships I wanted to invest in rather than maintain, had become residual. They occupied whatever was left after the commitments I had taken on for other reasons had been served. I did not exit this pattern quickly or cleanly. The first no's were difficult in a way I had not prepared myself for. Not because of external consequence, people, for the most part, accepted no with more equanimity than I had predicted, but because of the internal experience of saying no without the relief that yes had always provided. The anxiety that yes had been resolving did not resolve when I said no. It intensified, briefly, and I had to sit inside it without the management strategy one had been using. What I discovered, sitting in that intensity, was that it had a duration. That the fear of being unwanted, when not immediately managed by another demonstration of utility, did not escalate indefinitely. It spiked and then subsided. The relationship that had seemed contingent on my yes turned out, in instance after instance, not to be contingent. The person who had asked, and been told no, came back. Asked again about something else, or simply continued the relationship at its existing level without the reduction I had feared. The fear had been predicting consequences that were not the actual consequences. This is the thing about anxiety-driven behavior, it never allows itself to be tested. The yes comes before the test can happen, before the moment of finding out whether the fear's prediction is accurate. The continuous yes meant continuous management meant no information about what would actually happen if I declined. The pattern was self-sealing. It kept itself in place precisely by preventing the evidence that would have undermined it. Isabel had named this without knowing the mechanism. She knew the output without the internal structure. And because she was willing to say the difficult thing, I had the information I needed to start looking at the structure. I still say yes frequently. Saying yes is not the problem. The problem was the automatic quality of it, the preemption, the commitment offered before the internal question had been asked. The question I now try to ask first is simple and has taken years to feel natural. Do I want to do this, and am I saying yes because I want to or because something in me is afraid of what happens if I don't? The answer changes what the yes means. A yes from a place of genuine choice is a different thing than a yes from a place of preemptive management. The first builds the relationship between two people. The second builds the relationship between me and my own fear, and calls it generosity. I am a more selective yes now. I show up less frequently and more completely. The people who receive my time get more of me in it, because the time I give is time I have actually chosen rather than time I handed over before I had thought about whether I had it to give. That is what it feels like to give from overflow rather than from fear. I had not known the difference until I stopped giving in the way I had been giving. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real. Do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.